Hello and welcome, everybody. If you could go ahead and mute on your way in, or I'll try and mute on the side here. Welcome to today's Power User session. We'll be talking about Microsoft Endpoint Management Part 1. So that's foreshadowing for, let's see, July, which we will be talking about Part 2, but today we're going to get into Part 1. My name is Stephanie Kingsley, and I'll be facilitating and moderating today, and we have Corey Wolf with us to present. So thank you for coming. Just a couple housekeeping items. So yeah, please keep your microphones muted when possible. We will open it up at the end for anybody that wants to answer or ask questions. You can either post it in the chat or unmute at the end. If you have something that you would like to ask in the middle of the session and it seems very timely, please feel free to put it into the chat, and then I can either bring that up or you can raise your hand and we can interject it there. We typically try and keep some of the questions towards the end, but again, if we're going over something that you need to interject that question right there, please feel free. So awesome. So with that said, just 1 minute about MyTech. We just like to throw this in here because some folks who join us think that we're a training company, and we just want to give a little insight to what we are. So we are a business and technology consultant organization that serves small to medium-sized businesses in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota area, and the Denver area. And ultimately, what we're here to do is help organizations implement a proven IT strategy that's in alignment with their business goals. Our strategy is not the only strategy, and we're not saying it's the best strategy. It's just what we found to be proven. Again, we work with clients to make sure that it's in alignment with their goals. Ultimately, to remove their IT challenges. As small business owners, we all have many challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. So we're trying to remove the IT challenges so that you can focus and serve your customers better. So ultimately, putting that all together, our clients achieve 4 times more value and productivity from their IT investments. If this is something that you would like to talk about, feel free to raise your hand or reach out to us later. We'd love to have a conversation, but that's not ultimately why you're here today. So let's dig into the content, and I will hand it off to Corey to start talking to us about Microsoft Endpoint Management.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. So we'll start today with power users. So this is a power users group. Our power users definition is basically people who are going to help within an organization drive adoption of technology. We all know we have those individuals out there who are kind of reluctant, think the change is going to be horrible and make things tough. But the power user is somebody who's going to help them work through that. They're going to understand the pros and the cons of, what's going on in the environment, what changes does what changes, benefits things, breaks things, those kinds of things. But it's also going to understand the organization, not just like maybe their workflow or maybe, 2 or 3 people's workflow, but the organization as a whole that can help make decisions within that company. Somebody who can work with the IT leaders, with the C-level individuals to really help them see the benefits of some of the technology out there. And so these sessions that we do, the power user sessions, are aimed towards those individuals. And those should be all of you who are here with us today. All right, so just a quick recap of previous sessions. We have gone through SharePoint, kind of how to store files in SharePoint and Teams, how those interact together. We've gone through some of the collaboration and communication difficulties and how you can work through those with SharePoint in Teams. We've gone through some data protection policies, how to tag data, and then how rules can be applied to that data to either allow it to be sent out, stop it from being sent out, alert individuals if certain types of data is being exfiltrated. And then we've gone into multi-factor authentication and conditional access. So as many people know, everything in the world's moving towards, MFA, but how we can also put some rules and restrictions around that depending on, whether it's a company-owned device or a personal device, or whether they're in the office or outside of the office. And so we've gone through those previously. And this time we are going to be working on, I missed a name there, but this time we're going to be working on endpoint management with 365. So this is going to be, basically what's the backend look like? What are some, things with that? What is Autopilot? What is Intune? Those kinds of features. And then our next one, which will be in 2 months, we'll cover a little bit more detail on like the bring your own device side of things, mobile application management, and a little bit deeper dive on mobile device management. And that's going to be what we cover today and next time. Just a quick note on licensing. So Microsoft does have their large licensing suite with 365. Most of the features that we talk about here today are going to be provided within these 4 licenses that are highlighted. So the Business Premium, the 365, F1, E3, and E5. And as a note there, the Office SKUs don't include all the same feature sets that we'll be looking at today, but all of these do include like the basic Office utility apps there. And we're going to get into our content here. So this definition here is straight from Microsoft on what Endpoint Manager is. And to sum this all up, Endpoint Manager is a combination of tools that Microsoft has put together, being Intune, which is the cloud-based platform, Configuration Manager, which is the on-premise or like self-hosted platform, some desktop analytics, and then co-management between the Intune and the Configuration Manager. And then lastly is Windows Autopilot. All of these features are pretty awesome, but it gives you the ability to manage and monitor mobile devices, desktop computers, virtual machines, and different pieces like that. And so all of these are going to come together to help, build like a more IT sound strategy on keeping devices configured how you want them and moving forward with configuration and consistency. So the different pieces is Intune. So what is Intune? Intune is a cloud-based MDM and MAM solution. MDM, mobile device management. MAM is mobile application management. And it is compatible with Android devices, iOS or iPad OS, Mac OS, Windows 10 and 11 devices. And it integrates with Microsoft 365 services really well. You have Defender that it integrates with, Azure Active Directory, all of those, it integrates pretty seamlessly with those solutions. And then you have Autopilot, which I think is probably one of my favorite features here, is you can pre-configure devices and they can ship straight from the factory straight to the user. So if you have a work from home user who, let's just say, lives down in Texas and your office is in Minneapolis, you can get some information from like Dell, HP, Lenovo, whichever vendor you're working with. You can load that information into Autopilot, and then you can utilize Intune to create configuration for that. It goes to the user signs in, and configuration of their device takes place with what they are set up for. So Autopilot is really awesome with that feature. Configuration Manager is another piece. Now, this is formerly known as SCCM, or System Center Configuration Manager. It was rebranded to just Configuration Manager and integrated with the 365 stack. But it's the on-premise management solution for desktop servers and laptops. And it can be cloud enabled to integrate with Intune and Azure Active Directory, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and all the other cloud 365 services. It can be used to deploy application software updates and operating systems, and it can monitor compliance and query and act on clients in real time. So the same thing there as you can do with an Intune as well. And so the big things are why would you want to use Endpoint Manager? Kind of mentioned a few of these here, but the big thing here is it's going to simplify and it's going to make a consistent PC deployment. I know that, it's really hard to get one person to always do the same task every single time when you're trying to do a deployment. And so it's, you might have in one computer step, Y was missed, on the next computer step, like we'll just say 37 was missed. And so you can easily miss steps along the way, right? It's that human error that comes into it. Well, with using the endpoint management features, you can build policies that will do all of those actions for you. And so then in the end, you basically just log in with that user's account and it deploys the computer, deploys all the software, it deploys all the rules and the policies and everything that the user might need. And then it also comes in on the other side of our list here on the top is centralized reporting. So you can get reports back on that deployment, what was successful and what failed, and then you can take action from there. The next point there of the user and group specific deployments. So you might have different departments within your organization. And so you can actually create different groups that will apply different rules, policies, application installations, all of that based on the group permission. And then you can just assign a user to that group. It will then pull those permissions and it will install whatever it needs to, configure whatever it needs to based upon that group. And then again, here it's a reduced IT setup time. So instead of having, the old school mindset of somebody sitting there clicking, through all the installations and doing all of those, menial tasks, as I'll say, that just consume a lot of time. You take and set up endpoint management one time, and then it's really easy to maintain here and there with updates that need to happen. But every time you deploy a computer, you basically just go in, log it in, register it, whatever you have to do for that initial step, and then away you go, and the PC sets itself up. So it frees up that IT staff to work on other tickets within the organization. Another one here is centralized device management. So if we think about devices, it's really tough when you have to go to each individual device to try to make changes, updates, all of that. Traditionally we've had Active Directory with group policy to do centralized device management. However, with today's world with a lot of remote work, unless you're connected to the VPN, those policies don't always get applied. So with Endpoint Management, the whole suite, you can implement Intune, which then can apply policies to that device with just an internet connection. It doesn't have to be VPN'd into the domain or anything like that. So it creates a centralized device management platform that can talk to devices regardless of where they are. Again, centralized reporting. So as I mentioned earlier, it can show you what policies have been applied, which ones have failed, but you can get into some other reporting too, seeing what users are on what devices, what applications are installed on a device, some different things like that. We'll look at some of these in a demo here in just a little bit. And then you have improved security. So traditionally speaking, you'd have to have some sort of platform to do monitoring of a device. Well, with Microsoft's 365 platform, they do have some extra security features like endpoint detection and response. They have a SIM solution that's built in. And so a lot of those solutions can then be tied to Endpoint Manager to pull information from devices and then can take and report on that back to administrators. So that way they know, like, hey, this device might have a breach, or, there's this weird behavior going on, and they can get some of that security back. It also has a built-in baseline configuration following kind of best practices out there. And so you can implement that and you can see where it's at. You can enable things like BitLocker, and you can do a lot of those other types of security things with that. And then one of the other ones, which especially in today's world with remote work, is kind of a bring your own device mentality, right? So this allows people to go out, buy whatever device they might prefer to use. They can then register it within the Microsoft Azure environment. You can apply policies to all of the company-owned data. You can deploy applications, pieces like that. And then when that person leaves, you can just go in and say, clear company data, and it pulls off the company data, but it still allows them to use their device without losing data. Common areas where I see this today is really with email pretty heavily. A lot of us like to have email on our phones, and so Endpoint Manager allows you to control that data that's on their phone, that's owned by the company. Allows you to issue I'm going to use the term device wipe, but it's really just company data wipe, and it doesn't affect that user's personal email. It doesn't affect their pictures that they have on there, those different pieces there. So Endpoint Manager really basically brings a lot of the communication collaboration issues that you might see from remote workers kind of together into one solution to simplify, allow management of data and devices there so they can work from wherever they may want to work. So as we talk about that, there's a few different requirements. So each one of these pieces can be deployed kind of on its own or in combination with each other. And so if you're going to look at the on-premise route only, which is the configuration manager, without any sort of integration to the 365 platform, that would just be the on-prem only option here. That would be configuration manager, requires licensing with software assurance that allows for updates and things like that. But then it also requires having a fully licensed version of SQL, which sometimes can get kind of expensive when you start looking into those two pieces there. But that would be for on-prem only. That won't export or push any data up to 365 for any of the 365 platforms there. If you're going to do a hybrid, which is using both Configuration Manager and Intune, first you got to start with having Azure Active Directory sync enabled, and so that is going to synchronize identities between the on-premise Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. So that's going to be user accounts, groups, computers, all of that can be synchronized up. And then you also would need an Intune connector within the network, so that way it has a way to tie directly to Intune. Configuration Manager would be part of a hybrid deployment, allowing for some policies to be done on-prem, some to be done in the cloud. You can actually specify which one you want to be, if you will, a master or overwrite the other one. So you could say Intune overwrites, a policy from Configuration Manager if there's a conflict. You can set that precedence of which one is kind of the top dog there, if you will. And then you have the cloud only, which requires Microsoft 365 Enterprise licensing to be able to use that. And that is going to be joining the computer straight to Azure Active Directory as well. And so we'll kind of look at these different options. And then the other call out that I have here is that with a lot of these pieces, it's going to require Server 2016 or newer for setup and installation. And then on the endpoint side, for the Windows side, it's Windows 10 or 11 Pro or better. So you could be professional, enterprise, education, but it's that Windows 10 Pro level or better. Windows 10 Home or Windows 11 Home is not compatible with being able to be fully managed by any of these solutions here. So, as considerations here to take into account would be, how are you going to join your devices to Azure AD? I just kind of talked through the options there, but that would be one of the considerations to take into account when you're planning a deployment of endpoint management. So it's, do you want it to be hybrid with on-prem and cloud? Do you want it just to be the cloud only option or on-prem only option? And then another consideration taken into account is, company owned or personally owned devices. So this would be, like I say, like if you have an iPhone, you connect it to email, that's going to be your personally owned device. And then company owned would be, you buy that device as a company, you fully register it. This kind of gets into the next piece here with device purchasing a little bit. And the company fully owns the device, stays with the company when that person leaves. There are some requirements around how those devices are purchased. Most people are used to using iPhones today. If you purchase an iPhone just by going to a phone provider and register it with your personal Apple ID, that's going to classify under personally owned devices. But to get the full feature set, the device would have to be purchased under like an Apple business account as an example. We'll go into some of that setup next time, but just be aware that with certain devices, there are certain purchasing restrictions on how you can purchase and register those devices to get them into a fully managed state. And then the other piece here we'll talk about a little bit is, how do you want to apply policies? There's a couple of different ways to do that. You can do it by group, you can do it by tag, you can do it by directly assigning individual devices to a policy. But that's how you have to kind of determine how do you want to apply policies to the devices. And then along with some of those policies is, are there any conditional access policies that you want to add in play with some of that access that those devices have? And then one of the other neat things here is that if you have group policies, you can actually take and put those into the Intune platform, and it will give you a way to evaluate those policies and see if there is a direct translation into endpoint management. Just as a side note here with that is Intune is kind of like your replacement for group policy. However, it's not 100% like match for match on configuration. It does have the ability to pull in like ADMX files like you can with group policy to get specialized custom configurations. But there are just a few things that Intune doesn't have that you can do with group policy. But it also flips the other way. There's a few things you can do with Intune that you can't do with group policy. So just be aware of that, you'll want to run group policy evaluations on anything that you're thinking of trying to put into Intune, so you know how that translates. And so the different elements that are kind of within the platform would be, compliance policies. That's going to allow you to add a policy that basically says, does this device have this? If yes, it's compliant. If no, it's not compliant. If it's not compliant, I want you to take, this particular action. There's not like hundreds of actions you can take, but it's pretty much, set a grace period and let the device be on a grace period for X number of days and then mark it non-compliant. And the non-compliancy then is where you can start to use conditional access policies to say, this device is not compliant, stop them from being able to access any content within Microsoft 365, just as an example. And so that could provide some layers of protection there. Compliance policies might be set for like Windows updates, or maybe having BitLocker enabled, or having some sort of other type of compliance policy configured. And you can do custom configurations with that as well. Configuration policies, this is more of that kind of GPO replacement. So this would be things like, I am going to set up a policy to set the time zone on every machine to, Central Standard Time or whatever time zone it might be. It could be requiring that users have to have a PIN number when logging in. There's a number of different pieces here. Common ones that we set up are automatically logging users into OneDrive, syncing my documents, desktop, pictures into OneDrive, automatically mapping SharePoint sites to the user's accounts, like with OneDrive. So that way it's kind of like having it already loaded in the File Explorer for them. So that would be configuration policies. And there's a lot of them. We'll kind of take a quick peek into that window when we get there. Windows updates is another one. So you can do different levels of updates for different people. A lot of times they recommend doing like an update ring, as they would refer to it. So that's where you would create different groups, and you might say apply the newest Windows update to group A as soon as it releases and require it to install within 24 hours of release. And then that group, if they have issues, then hey, update happened, this update went in play, users are having issues with this. You can revert that, but instead of having the whole organization move to a new update without that testing in play, it could be a lot more disastrous. And so you can do update rings to allow you to push updates out at certain time frames, delay updates, pieces like that. You can, set it to push out like the Windows, like the twice a year update, like the really like major update changes. You can push those out, and then also like just the common, every month updates that they put out. You get reporting. So we'll look at some different reporting pieces here, kind of what you can see within the platform. It's really neat. I know I mentioned some of the reporting earlier, but we'll look at that. Conditional access can be set. Just pop open to conditional access and take a quick peek there on what you can do with conditional access. And then, like I said, security baselining. So that's going to really be enabling a whole slew of security features. There's like 400 lines, if you will, in the baseline security, from disabling, just as an example, disabling the camera when a computer is in a locked mode, to disabling a microphone when it's in a locked mode, copying certain log files into the 365 platform for review by the system if you're using like the SIEM solution or the EDR solution. So some different baseline things there. And so with that, we will pop into a quick demo that we have here. So I've already logged into Microsoft's 365 platform here. This is the admin center. And quick and easy way to get to Endpoint Manager is simply to, when you would normally come in here, you'll have a show more options, Endpoint Manager right here. And this will open up a new tab, which I already have open at the top here, which will look like this. And so this here is going to be your base kind of starting point for Endpoint Management with 365. One thing I'll point out here, I'm going back to the main admin center, and part of the reason I wanted this open here was to show here in the center of the page, we have user management, and right underneath it, it shows us that we have Azure Active Directory Connect installed and synced. And so this is an easy, quick way to see where you're at if you have a synced status or not. The other window I've also opened up at the top here is Azure Active Directory itself. And so I'll just click on that here, but this would be your Azure Active Directory page. And here again, we do have some AD Sync Connect options here. In this, if you were to click into here, this will just give you statuses of where you're at, show you errors, which is super helpful when you're looking at synchronization between the two. Highly recommend checking that everything is syncing properly. Otherwise, it could cause some potential issues. And so within here, over on the left, I've clicked on Azure Active Directory, and I'm just going to go under that area. I'm going to go down to devices just to give a quick show here of what Azure Active Directory shows. So I have put some devices in here. I've done up some managed devices, unmanaged devices. I've set some policies to show that we have compliance or not compliance. So under Azure Active Directory can give you a quick snapshot of what you have in your environment here. Total number of devices, unmanaged devices, non-compliant devices, as I stated. Stale devices, those are devices that haven't connected to 365 in 6 months or longer. A lot of times I'll see devices listed here that are registered with 365. Oftentimes that's cell phones that have been connected for email of past employees that those devices haven't been cleared out. So I tend to see that quite often here. You do have, the visibility to all devices. You can see here like this one we have now that shows as non-compliant. You can see different statuses of Azure AD joined or hybrid Azure AD joined. Within here, it'll show you registered dates and all of those last activity dates. Device settings, this is another thing just to be aware of. Do you want to require users to have, and use MFA to register a device or not? Highly recommend that be a yes as well in here. So that way it's, just adding a layer of security so nobody can just join a device if they happen to steal somebody's username and password. And so those are kind of the big pieces I would call out here. Anytime you see something like where it says BitLocker Keys Preview, preview just means it's a feature that's in testing by Microsoft. It's made it through its like alpha stage, and now it's kind of in that beta phase, letting people use it, reporting issues if they have it, so they can fix it, and then get it out of a, if you will, like a beta stage. That's really what preview means if you see that. But then here you can diagnose and solve problems, as it has some options here. And so it'll open up a virtual assistant. You can start to do some chat with a virtual assistant on problems that you may be facing. And so that's just what you can kind of have under the Azure Active Directory side. I'm going to hop into the Endpoint Management side now. And so we have devices, we have apps, endpoint security, reports, users, groups, tenant administration, troubleshooting, and support. So I've clicked on devices. And as you can see here by platform, we have Windows, iOS, iPad, Mac OS, and Android. We have an enroll devices, and then we have a whole bunch of policy options here. So I have created some general policies here to kind of show what can be done. But the first thing that you always need to do is you need to set up the ability for devices to be enrolled. And so enrolling devices, I've clicked on that here. When we go to that window, we will have Windows, Apple, Android, all the different devices there. So we're just going to focus on Windows devices today. And here you'll see some automatic enrollment, some general options, as well as some autopilot deployment options. And so autopilot, like I said, that's going to be where you deploy devices to users directly, and everything can be pre-provisioned. And there's a lot of different options with that. But one of the things that I will show in here, so I've already installed and I built in an Intune connector. So you'd have an Intune connector, and it's just basically an application you install on a server. It connects it and gets you connected. You can and then you can also do that with endpoints. I just done it on one device here though. Deployment profiles. So this is going to be like basically how is that device going to be deployed within the solution. So there's different join types, as we mentioned earlier. So Azure AD, which is the cloud only option. So here you can see I've got two different policies, one configured, one for Autopilot with Azure AD and one for Active Directory synced devices. And this basically just allows you to specify some of the out-of-box experience. So this is, is the deployment mode user-driven? How is the device going to be joined? Do they need to see all the T's and C's when they're logging into the device? Type yes or no type idea. And then there's an assigned devices. When devices are assigned, they'll show up under here so you can see what policies they're being applied to them. And then you have devices. So this is where I was mentioning earlier that you get something from the vendor, Dell, HP, whoever it happens to be. There are ways you can generate the information as well, but this is where you would actually import hardware IDs. And so just as an example, we go import. I have a file already created. And when pulled in, it will tell us if it's formatted correctly or not. We will import, and then it will basically import that device. It's not going to be like an instant show up, but it'll take a few minutes, and then that will show up as a device under Autopilot as a deployable device. So you would get a CSV file from Dell, HP, whoever it would happen to be. You would load in here, and then you can start to assign policies and pieces to those devices. And then, so that's the kind of the Autopilot side. The general side here, the big things to look at are automatic enrollment. And so this is where it's going to say, okay, automatically join to, Intune, all of that with MDM or MAM. And it allows you to put in some custom T's and C's, if you will, on, that can show the user like, oh, well, show them these are the terms of, joining this device to MDM, or this is the terms of showing the device joining to, MAM. And so that way users can have all the T's and C's up front. Is kind of a way to cover yourself. Windows Hello for Business. This is that ability to say, hey, do the users use a PIN number? Do they use biometrics? Do they use phone sign-in? Like, how can they sign in to their device without just a plain password? And so you have a lot of configuration here that you can assign. I have the policy disabled right now, but you can enable it or leave it as not configured. TPM, that's basically a security feature. All devices today should have that built into them. So required is usually a good option here. But here you can set pin length. You can say, do they need to use, uppercase letters, lowercase, like you can do an allow or required for that pin number to get in. How long is the pin good for? Again, do you want to let them use biometrics or a phone? You can even use a security key. That's going to be like a hardware token, like a YubiKey type device to be able to sign into the computer. And then enrollment status. Basically, you'd create just a standard enrollment status. I will click on this here. But this is going to basically, how is the device going to enroll? show screens like, when it's setting it up. Do you want the users to see that screen or not? What's the error message that you want them to see if it fails? Do you want to turn on log collection? Just some basic things here of that device with deployment. We'll see a little bit of that here in just a minute. And then co-management. So this is that hybrid option. So if you're doing a cloud and on-prem option, co-management allows you to specify how that's applied. And so I've gone in here and I've just created a policy that basically says override co-management policies and use Intune for all workloads. So what that means is that if there is a conflict, it will use Intune as the source of authority over Configuration Manager, which would be the on-prem solution. And so that's kind of the device enrollment here. Quick and easy. These, go in, you just set a couple settings. And I saw the message pop up for that. So now here, you can see that the device that we imported, now it's a virtual machine, so that's why it says serial number VMware, manufacturer VMware. But this is a Windows 10 PC. So we have that. I can come in here. I can start to give it a name. I can assign tags to it, different pieces like that. Tags will be a way that I can start to assign some policies as well. That's one of the different policy options. But that's more or less registering device. So I went back up at the top. I clicked devices, went back to the main device screen here. And so just popping into compliance policies, here you can configure compliance policies. This is one that I've created for Windows 10, Defender low compliance. And so what this policy is here is basically says that device requires to have secure boot enabled. And if Windows Defender identifies the device as having a score above a low status, so Defender is going to be like antivirus, firewall, things like that. If it defines it as a medium risk, it's then going to mark that device incompliant or non-compliant. So then you could utilize conditional access policies to do things from there. And then under device statuses, we have one here. It says it's not applicable because it doesn't apply to this device. And I clicked on the device here, but I'm going to go back. So that would be that. I'm going to click back on devices. I'm going to go to configuration policies here on the left. And here you can see a couple that have been put in. OneDrive and SharePoint sync, Intune or time zone, and then another device configuration restriction policy. And so under here, I'll just go under create new profile. Here you can see all the different platforms that you have to choose from, but Windows 10 and later. And then you have a settings catalog, which is in preview, or templates, which you can see here. There is a lot of options, admin templates, custom delivery optimization, a lot of it, even all the way down to like a VPN deployment, Wi-Fi connection, wired network connections, setting up network boundaries, endpoint protection, email things. So, domain joining devices, things like that. Administrative templates, I will open that up. And I'm just going to do a sample here. And this here is where you can really start to see that traditional group policy look of computer and user configuration that you might be used to if you're administering group policy on-prem. But under here, this is where you can start to get into some of that more granular permissioning set. Under the policy, when you create it, I just closed out of that one. When you do templates and you do custom, this is where it allows you to getting in here. This is where it allows you to start adding in some of those custom settings that I had mentioned earlier, ADMX files, which allow you to do customized configuration within group policy. So I am going to go ahead and hop out of here. Conditional access. So this is where you can start to do policies. Now there's not one configured here, but what we can do is we can come in, create a new policy under conditions, and this is where you can start to specify device platforms. So you could say if it's a Windows device, we can start to do grant controls over here, require it to be either hybrid Azure AD joined, or here we said marked compliant, pieces like that. So now you could say, if it's, grant controls, if it's, marked as a compliant device. If it's marked as a compliant, awesome. Now all of a sudden you can connect. But if it becomes uncompliant or a non-compliant device, it will no longer allow you to connect. So this is where conditional access can come into play with endpoint management to control access into the 365 environment. I'm going to go ahead and close this out and not save the policy. But that's there. You can do custom PowerShell scripts you can apply. Again, update rings, feature updates and quality updates. You can set up within here, and it will give you all of the different statuses of where things are at, if they've been deferred or not deferred, how long they can be deferred, all of that there. So this is where you would do that. We can dig in a little bit more into some of these too next time when we have our other session, but I want to jump over to apps here. Apps is now where you can start to deploy applications. And so you have different platforms, but I'm going to click on the Windows platform, and here we have a policy that basically installs all the Microsoft 365 productivity suite, right? This is going to be, as I click in here, Access, Excel, OneNote, Outlook, PowerPoint, Publisher, Teams, Word. So anything that's part of that kind of productivity suite there, you can install here. You can also, I'm going to go back to apps, following the breadcrumbs at the top there. You can also do other applications installations here. And so I'll click on all apps. You'll notice here you have iOS, Android. So if it's in there, if it's in like those stores, you can install it and set a policy to install it. I'm going to just create a sample policy here. And so here you can go, you can do web apps, built-in apps, line of business apps. You can do Win32 apps. So that's going to be like think of a installer you download from the internet, like a .exe file or a .msi file. You can install those through this platform into or onto a device. And so when you click something like that, it will tell you, the kind of the pieces there, but it allows you to come in here and then select a file and work through that. I don't have a file to select offhand, but it would allow you to go through here. You can specify parameters as if you were to say, silently install so the users aren't impacted by the install. You can say, look for a file in this folder. If it's there, it's already installed, so skip installing. Some different pieces with that there as well. So you can install applications to devices from there. You can even start to come in here and create configuration policies to protect the data as well. And so like if we were just to look at this one here, right, so it allows them to use the Office apps on a personal device. It prevents data from being saved to like their OneDrive or their, say like this is an Android, so like their Google Cloud. It prevents data from being able to be saved there. Allows some certain screen share things. It's now down here under access. So like it's going to require that they have a PIN to access data. So this is actually a really neat feature. So like if they open up, Outlook on their phone to read their email, it's going to ask them for a PIN number to connect into Outlook. So if somebody were to steal their phone, they can't get into Outlook without that PIN number. And so you have some of those different pieces here, and then let me see assignment there. So this is just one policy example here of where you can start to do some of these, as I said, like security improvements towards data, especially where it's accessed from. You can also do app configuration policies, manage browser. App configuration is a great example where you can actually do some controls within there. So like here, this one is blocking AOL, and then this one is blocking a couple other or this is bookmarking. Sorry, this one's blocking. This one is bookmarking, like Outlook on the web, Bing, and things like that. So it's giving them some configuration here. So click back on apps, and so you can do that across the different platforms as well. So that's applications. Under endpoint security. As we look here, this is where we're going to start talking about some of that baselining. And so this is just an example of a baseline policy. I will click on it here and click on properties. And you can see here, here's all the different categories as I scroll through it. Just this first one, voice activations from the lock screen, enable or disable. There's a couple there. When you get down into some of these other ones, event logging services, there's a couple more options. I'm trying to remember which one it is. Under one of these, there's like a whole bunch of options. Internet Explorer, here's a great example where there's a ton of different options that you can configure for that. Obviously, there's not time to go through every single one of these options, but this is just to give you an idea that under baselining here, you have a lot of options to lock down security. Common ones you also hear about, like remote desktop, not management, remote desktop services. You can do some additional security around remote desktop services from here, Wi-Fi, and PowerShell. And so when we clicked on this initially, this screen here popped up. This screen here is basically all the policies will have something similar to this. And it shows you successes, errors, if there's conflicting policies, and if it's not applicable. So it'll give you some sort of chart like this here. I'm going to click back over on devices real quick and go to a configuration policy over here. And you'll see it's a little different here, how it's laid out. But if you click view report, it will give you a report of all of the devices that are within status, what are succeeded, errors, conflicts, not applicable, which ones it's in progress of deploying. So that's there. I'm going to go to reports now on the left. This gives you similar view of pieces here. So device compliance, it will show you what devices are compliant, what devices are not compliant. And so like here we have one compliant device that it states there as well. And so you can just kind of go through the menus to see what options there are, what it has. We'll show you Windows Defender antivirus items. Just doing a refresh here so we can actually get some data pulled in. It may pull something in for us, it may not. There's just a couple of devices. You can also manage, I clicked on firewall, you can also manage the firewall from there. All right. And so here we've got, it's reporting all devices are clean, no issues out there. Here you have Endpoint Analytics, and so this is where you can start to see security and other features around the device, startup performance, application reliability, work from anywhere, and so it will show you statuses on where you're at as far as what Microsoft has classified here, and you can set different parameters behind that as well, and so you can get some specific device scores in here as well. Back to the main reports page here. And you'll see like certain features here do require an Azure subscription. And so Azure Monitor is part of the solution for like SIM, which is the basically like logging, endpoint detection, response, all of those pieces, like they need somewhere to store data. That's like your Azure Monitor, storing data there and reviewing of logs. So that's there. Under troubleshooting and support, I think is another great feature to show out here. So here I'm going to come in. It's going to give me some options for troubleshooting things here. I can select users. In our environment here, we have a bunch of test users, sample users. I'm going to click on user 2, who should have some data when it loads in. So here it shows us that there is a device that is, there's a policy that will apply to that user under client apps. but it shows us no devices assigned to that user. You can come under here and you can see compliance policies that would apply, configuration policy profiles that would apply, apps, all of that. So if there's a user who's having trouble and you're trying to determine what's applying to them, you can come in here and actually evaluate everything that's applying to a user and see what might be causing issues. And now I am going to pull up a different screen here real quick, just to show. So this is we've got some PCs here, just as an example. So in our environment, we've got some PCs that are joined, some that aren't. But one of them, so like PC1 is not joined to the environment. If we go under settings and we look, this device is just connected to a local domain. It's not connected to Azure Active Directory in any sense or any sort of MDM solution. And we can confirm that by, where did my window? There we go. We can confirm that by coming under devices, Windows platforms, and saying that we don't have, we only have one device in here. And if we look at this device name, oh, wrong window I'm thinking of here, sorry. If we come under here, we can look at our device name. And our device name is Win1001. And if we go back to our window, we can see that that is not a registered Windows device within the environment. So we can see that there. This device you can see here says personally owned. And so when we go back, we're not a Azure AD joined. We can join this to Azure AD by coming in here, going under Access, Work, and School, and we can actually, enroll in device management. You would need to be an administrator to be able to do those kinds of settings, but you could come in and enroll into device management and then be joined into Intune. PC3, as an example here, pull up the settings for us to look at here. You will notice is registered to the on-premise domain as here, which is the contoso.demo, but then it's also registered to Work and School, which would be the 365 account. And so this one here, if in this one I just did a little bit ago, and these do take some time to show up, but I'm going back to the Azure Active Directory portal and I'm going to devices and I'm looking at all devices, and we can see here that this device here is joined to Azure as Azure AD joined. Oh, that's not two. That one was 3. Sorry. We can see that it's Azure AD hybrid joined. No management here. Hybrid join is through a connection with AD Sync. But then here I also was able to register it as a different device, and it's under Microsoft Intune Management. So you can see here it actually has registered it twice under here. You'll see Windows 10.1 is hybrid joined. Again, it's not managed by anything. That's why it doesn't show up under the Intune platform over there. And we have our other device, this one here, that is non-compliant and not showing up in the environment. And now you can see here that device that we imported is actually right here, showing us that it is registered in there. So it's not under it's not under Endpoint Management because it doesn't know where to classify it. As we look at it, it has an unknown operating system. So we have that there, and that's just to show there's 2 ways really to get a Windows PC connected. And so this one, I am logged in as an administrator, and this is just as simple as coming in here, going connect. Now this one you can see is not joined to the what would be the traditional Active Directory domain. Come in here, you can hit connect, and then it gives you the option to join this device to Azure Active Directory or a local Active Directory. I'm going to say I want to join it to an Azure Active Directory environment. I can then put in our username and our password. And this will walk through the process of registering the device. It'll verify organization, yes, and then it will tell you that it's going to start setting the device up for whatever policies are there. So if we were to look back on this device in about 20, 30 minutes, Microsoft Office would be installed. Any of those policies would be applied. So that is one way to get it connected. From the other experience, give me 1 second to pull this up. And this comes more towards that Autopilot deployment. Pulling up the other server here, if it's going to let me in, or the other machine here. Might not let me in here. There we go. All right. Should load up for us here in just a second. But that is going to be this other device here that we set up. That's the device I'm trying to get loaded up for us here that doesn't want to load for us. Anyhow, so it allows for out-of-box experience. So that's when you first get a device, you've probably had that where you've gotten a new laptop or something, and it's like, what keyboard do you want to use? What language do you want to use? Those settings there, that's the out-of-box experience. During that, it has you create a user. You can actually use that, put in the company username and password, and it will then join it to Azure Active Directory and do all of the configuration right there. And that's the experience that I'm trying to show here that does not want to be friendly with us on. So give me just 1 second to try this again. Should I reload our web page here? Some technical difficulties that can happen with demos, right? So, all right. There we go. All right, here we go. All right, so this would be the out-of-box experience. And so from this right here, this is where you can come in. You can walk through the basic setup, keyboard layout. This here with a full setup for from the manufacturer. This could all be bypassed, and they just basically get to the point of putting in their username and password. So it's a combination of working with that organization to get set up. This is going to do a network connect, and then just wait for this to load up here. And then this is basically the end of the demo that we have here. You gotta love the Microsoft lines they throw at us. So just giving this set up here. And we're going to come back here. All right, there we go. So here we have licensing agreement we will agree to. And I was trying to see if it was going to show up for us in our portal here, but it's not there yet. Okay. So we would go set up for an organization. You would go next. You'll put in that username and password using the email address. And you'll notice it finds the company right away. It connects in, and this would be the experience that a user might see when they get a device, depending on how it's set up. And then from here, it's going to go through, roll right through all those configurations that we have assigned to the user. All right, and so that's kind of the out-of-box experience that you would see for a user. Let's see here if we are. Sometimes these can take a minute to load, but we should see this device check in here in just a few minutes as an available device. Sometimes it can take up to like an hour for a device to sync in there, but you can see that it's showing us now it's working on preparing the device. It's going to do device setup and account setup. So this is all of the configuration that was configured in our endpoint management through 365 that it's now starting to apply onto this PC. And then when we're done, that is where we would end up with like the PC3 here where we have joined. It'll install Office, Word, Outlook, the whole Office suite there. It will do a OneDrive connection because it's configured that way for OneDrive. So it'll auto join the company OneDrive and as well. So that's what you would get in the end. It'll take it, a half an hour to pull down all those configurations and set them up or so, but that is what this would be the outcome of what you would get from doing that there. So but that kind of wraps up the walk through the demo of that platform there. I will pop back over here and there we go. All yours, Stephanie.
Well, thanks, Corey. Yeah, and I love demos. Never fail to always go slower or or something breaks every time we do a demo. But thanks everybody for attending. Yeah, feel free. If you have questions, feel free to use the raise hand feature, type it into the chat, or just unmute and feel free to ask any questions. So we will open the floor for that. Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Saying no questions at this time. Yeah, so as Corey had mentioned, our next Power User Group will be at the end of July. So anybody attending or who registered, will send you a link to that as well to register, and that will be going into part 2 of this. And as always, you can visit mytech.com/power-user-group. That has all the recordings. We'll be sending the recording of this as well, but that also has our future sessions as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, if there's no questions, I think we will say good day. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.